Yes, please come in on stage. Cat, everyone.
Hello.
So really happy to have you here, and I've been reading a lot of stuff, and so great to have you at SmashingCon.
Glad to be here.
Now, when we're thinking about the UX work that we've been doing, I think that over the years, over the last decade, we've become so good at some things. Like Figma, we can do everything in Figma. We can design the beautiful buttons and stuff.
Love pixels.
So good at this really tactical stuff. But then once we need to go beyond that to become more strategic, right? To speak the language of the business, to explain what we're working on and how we're doing things, we maybe find it a bit difficult. Do you feel like that?
Getting that seat at the table.
Yes, the seat at the
Spicy.
table.
Ooh.
Exactly. So how do we actually make this transition? So if you actually been spending quite a bit of time as a designer, and you maybe want to kind of move up in one direction or the other, maybe more towards directorial level, maybe towards kind of closer to the business, how do we do that? And so Kat has been thinking and writing and spending quite a bit of time kind of looking into this and how we can actually do just that. So just for us to know, Kat is a staff product designer at Dropbox. I had to look it up, sorry. Right?
That's fine.
And also a game maker, and this is something I underlined here, makes awkward video games.
Oh yeah.
We need to know more
I
of
mean,
that.
UX is it's very similar to game design to me in that, you're essentially creating experiences for people, and why not play with that a little bit and make people uncomfortable?
Fantastic. Well, I'm really looking forward to hear and see more of that. So please, everyone, give a wonderful round of applause to Kat Small.
Amazing. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. Ooh, okay. Spicy, loud. Amazing. All right, so I'm Kat. I have a lot of jobs, some of which were mentioned before. So I've worked at companies like Dropbox, Asana, Etsy, SoundCloud, and more. I also, as was mentioned, I'm a game developer, an artist, a writer, event organizer, lots of things, so fun. But as was said, today we're going to be talking specifically about strategic design. We're going to talk about how designers get sidelined and pressured to really execute and essentially push pixels. And then tips and tricks also, and just general tactics for increasing design's contributions to product strategy. So let us dig in. All right, so we're going to start with the value prop, as one does. So why should people care about this? Why should teams care? And why does having a seat at the table, or really a design-led strategy, matter? So the first reason that it's important to have a involvement as designers within the world of strategy is essentially that it gives you direction. And it's really nice when you're not just reading the direction in on a piece of paper, for example, or like in a Google Doc or Dropbox Paper, Airhorn, or Notion Doc or something like that. It's really helpful to actually see and experience the direction, and that's something that designers do really well, right? We illustrate the future. So that's really great, and it gives teams a picture of the future that they're moving for and essentially motivates them. Something else that it can do is to also help you come up with more innovative solutions. So obviously we love our workshops and our sticky notes and all of those kinds of things, but essentially design can spur innovation. And it can also help you determine when you should stick to maybe more predictable experiences. So we've talked about things like accessibility and those darn date pickers that we see everywhere. Why are we always making new ones? Is that a time for innovation, or are there better uses of our time? Design can help us to prioritize those kinds of things through conversation. It also, design work can also help teams validate, essentially, that your chosen solution is going to have the most impact. So collaborating with user research, for example, and really getting creative about ways to quickly test concepts so that you don't spend a bunch of engineering, for example, or product time on ideas that really don't matter as much. And you can build confidence at the same time that the work that you are going to spend a lot of energy on is actually the right work. But unfortunately, designers are often not involved in this kind of work. So there are definitely places that have been pushing, obviously, for the involvement of design. And we've heard so much about the seat at the table and the challenges of walking away and toward the table over the past couple of years. But I'm still finding that very often when I talk to designers, they're like, I'm waiting for my product manager to give me the requirements. And then I'm like, wait, what? You still do that? Like we're in 2024. And we are still having this conversation about waiting for requirements. So it's clear to me that we need to continue to have this back and forth discussion. So why is this happening? I think there are several different reasons. So firstly, for example, Sarah Veselov said this very well, a lot of companies honestly create a culture where they think that it's okay to not involve designers until the solution has already been identified, which is interesting. Maybe the job of design is making a solution look pretty? No, it's obviously not, right? Like we want to actually deeply engage with the problem itself and make sure that we're focused on the right problems. This has been my life. Maybe this is familiar to you. I heard somebody say, yep. How many of you have teammates who have said something like this or kind of ask you, like, can you make this slide look pretty? Like, can you just kind of, yeah, I'm seeing some hands out there. Yeah, this is a vibe, right? Yeah, raise your hand if that's like, you've seen this, you've felt this, yeah. So in the year that it is, 2024, at our big ages, we are still having these conversations. It's so fun. This happens, right? A lot of times what will happen, in my experience, is that designers will get pulled in after the solution has already been identified, the product requirements have been documented in a beautiful paper, and then you're just like, okay, but there's this problem, that doesn't make sense. Okay, I actually prototyped this, and this is all kind of broken and just not great. And then you're put in the uncomfortable position of actually slowing things down, pushing back, and it really creates this frustrating relationship, which I've for sure had before. And I don't know, have any of you kind of had this experience in your past as well? I see you, yep, okay, that's a vibe, yeah. Okay, cool, great, we're suffering together, that's cool. So, obviously this results in frustrating outcomes. It can be bad for teams, it can be bad for us as designers, there's the friction that we talked about, but also customer outcomes are, a concern to also consider here. So, for example, this is an older example, which is because I work really hard to make sure this never happens again. So back in 2016, I was working on this experience during my time at SoundCloud, where essentially the company was trying to move from being more of like a cloud storage platform for creators and really to like lean into being a music distribution platform and to actually have like a paid listening subscription very similar to Spotify. The thing is that when we were talking to people in research, when we were showing concepts to people, they were like, we don't really want to pay for that. Like, we already have our subscription over there. And also, like, SoundCloud is kind of like YouTube. Like, it's free, it's wild, it's like a fun place, but like we don't really want to pay you like a bunch of money to get stuff that we already have access to. And we also don't want to pay for like major label content on SoundCloud, which is like not where we go for that. So we just got a lot of signal that this was going to be a bad time. And so we tried to actually push back, but it was too late to actually find a new business model. So they had to roll this out, and this is actually an article that was written about the downfall of that unfortunate launch. And for me, basically my takeaway was I do not want to have this experience again in my work life. And this happened 8 years ago, I think, at this point, but I still hear people talk about projects like this all the time. So I really think it's important that we continue to have this conversation and really figure out ways that we can claim our agency in this world of product development. So, as Brad Frost said, for example, we are more than just rectangle creators. We're humans who have thinking brains, and as designers, we really want to make sure to, as I said before, engage with the full problem and to make sure that we're really focused on the right work. So how can we actually participate? Let's talk about that. I'm going to share, as I mentioned, several specific tactics that can help. So firstly, Goals. I actually worked at Asana on the goal management platform, so I'm like a very nerdy person when it comes to thinking about objectives and outcomes. And I'm not gonna like spend a bunch of time shilling about like OKRs or anything like that, but I do actually think that goals are really important. And what I mean by that is actually understanding what matters to the people around you and to the business itself. This is usually actually quite easy to do because ideally, fingers crossed, if you're working at an organization, they have written this down somewhere. If they haven't, that's a red flag, and I don't know what you can do about that. But you might want to go talk to like the CEO. So the reason that this matters essentially is because a lot of designers will get into this place where they essentially are just focused on those pixels. So I've seen this at all levels, and I've seen people write about this more recently, that essentially the design process that was learned in like books, TikTok, YouTube, classes, that's like real life. And honestly, real life is extremely messy, and you need to make sure that you're really deeply involved with the business itself, rather than kind of like hiding in a corner and kind of like doing like what we think of as like the art stuff, where you're just kind of like creating, your own little stuff, and then you come out and you're like, it's beautiful, and people are like, yeah, but like, it's been like 3 months, like what are you doing? So we need to actually like really involve other people. We need to be thinking about strategy and really consider the context of the organization in the way that we are working. So if you don't know where to start, you can honestly ask other people around you. So people love to talk about what matters to them. And for example, I've learned a lot from just scheduling 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes with product managers. You can schedule time with your data analyst, for example, the engineering lead on your team, design leadership. Every single person around you has something that they can share that really matters deeply to them, and the more that you know this kind of information, you can actually start to use it. Now, what I mean by that specifically is that when you're essentially understanding how more things fit together and essentially using that design brain that you use for the systems design of the work itself, but you're using it for your organization, you can start to figure out where the things that you care about kind of fit into that work. And then you can start to actually reflect the information that people are telling you back to them, and you can add the things that you care about to those things. So essentially, you're kind of like, I guess almost not like you're kind of elegantly shoehorning essentially the things that you care about, but you're essentially, I guess, like translating that information through the lens of what matters to them the most. So that'll essentially help other people in different roles see the value of your work as a designer beyond just the pixels. Some other things that you can do that are related to understanding the context of the business, for example, is to actually take a course. So this is an example. I really like sketchnoting. And so I took a bunch of notes because it just helps me to learn during this course that I took called Business Essentials for Designers, and it's run by Designer Fund, but there are a lot of different options out there. I've also taken courses, for example, on project management, and essentially also being in a space like this can help you as well. But there are a lot of ways to learn the vocabulary, essentially, of the different roles that people have. So if you're ever like, what is, I don't know, like, what is a TAM, like total addressable market? It turns out that that's like made up gibberish, basically. And there's a lot of stuff that I learned through this Business Essentials course, which was just like the whole thing's made up, and estimates are a lie. And it was actually really fun because now I can come into these conversations and kind of like throw out these words. And also, I think the other thing that's nice is that now I empathize a lot with product managers, because are there any PMs here? I don't know if there are any PMs here. That's what I thought. I thought this was like not a PM-filled room. But essentially, PMs are terrified like all the time. And their entire job is just like guessing. And so the more that you can actually help them build confidence, they will freak out a lot less, and they'll actually be very open to working with you. So once I learned a lot about that, I was like, okay, let me just concentrate on, like I could do this thing, and that will actually help us build confidence. I see that this might be a little bit risky. Do you want me to kind of like dig into this further? Just essentially offering some of my skills to support their work and make them freak out, honestly, a lot less. So that's number one, just understanding objectives. And then number two is to set boundaries. So this one's really important to me personally because I love to essentially kind of like tell people what my capacity is. So before I had the like little sad friend, but you can actually say a bunch of things to people when they ask you for certain things. There are a lot of ways to say no, so you can say obviously just straight up no, but you could also say, can I get back to you? You know, what's the priority of this compared to this other thing that we've been working on? Oh, I love the enthusiasm here. What do you think of the timing of this work? Are we thinking like now, 3 months from now? There are a lot of ways essentially that you can do the improv thing that's called yes and, where you're kind of like taking it in, you're not cutting people off, you know, we don't like to close the conversation completely, but maybe you want to actually start to have a little bit of a deeper conversation and collaboratively triage incoming requests together, essentially. And by doing this, you're gonna actually make the work and like the process that you go through visible to your stakeholders so that they can actually start to build some empathy for the effort that it takes to do your job. Related to this, I also really, really like to set clear expectations through time. So you don't have to, I don't know if, so my friends know that like I'm the calendar queen. And so what I mean by that is like, I am obsessed with Google Calendar, and like I have color coding and I have a whole system, and I have like one of those like AI tools that'll just kind of like actually like schedule focus time for you and all those kinds of things. You don't have to be that person. But I do think it is actually useful to understand how much time you generally have so that you can start to actually help people understand when they're asking you for something, they're actually subtracting from something else, or, oh, maybe we need to actually be adjusting the amount of energy that I'm spending on certain things. So for example, if we take 1 quarter, that's 3 months, right? For me, the thing that I've done historically is I've actually looked to see how many meetings I have per day in, for example, maybe a week, and then I average that out. So if a typical quarter has like 13 weeks, for example, and every week I work 40 hours. Maybe on average I have like 15 hours worth of meetings, which is like kind of wild to think about, but honestly on a nice week, 15. And then that's about 63% of my weekly work being, you know, focus time. So then you can, again, you can multiply that by the 3 months, and then what does that look like? So that would be, for example, in a single month, I've got 20 work days, and then about 13 of those days maybe are focus, and then you can, again, multiply that. So this kind of thinking can actually help you understand how much focus time you have, and then it can help you organize your work. You can also do things like chunk your meetings together so that you have blocks of focus time at the beginning and the end of the day, which I really, really recommend if you're not doing, because one of the most challenging things about being a designer is context switching. And again, this is something that you can tell to people so that they understand and can empathize with that cute little 30-minute meeting that they put right in the middle of your day, which is now going to actually subtract 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after, because you have to prepare, and then you have to unwind afterwards. So those are the things that I try to minimize, and I'm pretty intense with people about saying, hey, can we move this? Or I will proactively move things around, essentially, so that my calendar is as designed as the work that I output at the end of a project. Rainbow. Design. So that's one thing. The other thing I love to do is just generally set expectations about you know, when they're asking for like a bunch of things that are equal in priority and they're giving me like 3 weeks, for example, I'm gonna burn out. Like I just don't have time to deliver all of those things, high quality, beautiful, usable, quick. It's just, it's a lot. And we have to have conversations essentially to negotiate, okay, well, maybe, you know, one piece of this project is actually the most important, so that's where I'm gonna spend the most of my time, and then I'm gonna I'm gonna phone it in. It's still gonna look great. I'm gonna put in a lot of work. I'm still gonna be phoning it in on this other part that honestly doesn't matter as much, like the date picker. What are we doing? That should be like really simple. we already have a billion date pickers out there. Let's not redesign the wheel. But for this experience that's very unique to this product, then I obviously want to spend all of my time researching, iterating, really getting that part really great. So these are the kinds of conversations that I have with my team so that we're actually, having appropriate expectations about how I'm spending my energy. So essentially, it's a collaboration. Now, if you're at a smaller team or on a smaller team, this might involve, for example, negotiating on, like, can we hire a contractor? Should we, use existing patterns that are out there for certain parts of this work? If you're at a bigger company, maybe you can actually start to pull in other team members from other parts of the organization to help with some of the work that maybe could be delegated. And again, by doing this in conversation with lots of other people, you're creating this empathy, and you're also using that as essentially leverage to be able to, I guess you could say, you're really like collaborating rather than kind of working in this silo and just saying, yes, I will do this, yes, I will do this, and then kind of burning out silently. So I like to work in public. I like to communicate my capacity very clearly to people. Something else that you can do is to actually estimate your work in a little bit more detail. So you can break down larger projects into smaller pieces of work and then explain, for example, if you have like this huge new product area that you're making, well, like this piece is really risky, it's really complex, so that can be a way to determine that we should spend most of our energy over here versus something that's a lot simpler and we know a lot about it already. You probably want to spend less energy on that particular kind of problem. So then, with this all together, you can hopefully have a very knowledgeable conversation. But something else I do want to also call out is, as I said before, about things like total addressable market and other business terms. A lot of these things are going to be wrong. They're estimates, they're guesses. But the point with estimating your work is to really help you to be able to focus. And it's essentially to make sure that you are making as informed decisions as you possibly can about the future. Other ways to actually estimate your work, for example, might be impact. There's things like reversibility. So if we do this, will we be able to undo this later? I've heard this referred to as the one-way door or the two-way door before as well. You might also just think about priorities. So what does the business care about, for example? There are so many ways that you can actually estimate your work. It's really up to you to determine the criteria that feels comfortable. But I like the risk and complexity one because I feel like it kind of feeds into some of these other ones as well. So this is an example from a real project. So at this time, I was using a spreadsheet because I wanted to do some formula stuff, and it was back in 2020 before we had other fancy tools that could also do the same thing. But essentially, I had a huge project, which was to launch a new product area for Asana at the time, and essentially, we had to have all these features within the work that we were doing within like 3 to 5 months. And honestly, it was like a lot of energy to expend for all of these. And so I had to put them all, these features, I broke down the work into features and then essentially said, hey, like, I think this is gonna be an extra large because it's super complicated, it's super risky, and we really need to get the like, detail page right. We need to make sure that we're actually like scoping this work appropriately at all. So that's like a #1 thing. NUX was new user experience. We really wanted to make the onboarding as good as possible. So that was where I wanted to spend a lot of energy, for example. Monetization is important, but like lower priority or lower risk because like we had a bunch of other areas of the company that already did monetization work, so we could just lean on that, for example. So this was a conversation starter that I used with my team to actually figure out, like, okay, onboarding is really important. We want to make sure that we have the list of goals. It looks really good. And then some of the other areas of this work, we're going to honestly just spend less time perfecting, quote unquote, because maybe we just have enough information already internally to work with them. Awesome. So then the next tactic out of 5 is stagger your work. So building on the previous one, once you start to break down your work, you can continue to prioritize it. You can also scale that up to prioritizing projects, for example, and then that'll give you the space to invest more in strategic thinking. So something I see a lot with designers is that they're working on a bunch of tiny little feature improvements, for example, one after the other, and they're just like, I don't have time to actually like step back and think bigger. What are ways that you could actually start to stagger your work so you have bigger projects and then smaller projects? So something that you could do, for example, is you can actually start to organize the incoming project ideas, or maybe it's the roadmap, for example, and you can actually do that and put that onto a matrix like this one, where you have low effort to high effort, and then low impact to high impact. And then if there are things that are obviously very high impact but also high effort, well, that's got to be a longer term project, right? And then if there's stuff that honestly is like low impact and low effort, should we even be doing those? It should be a conversation. So the thing that I've realized is, especially at smaller companies, a lot of teams will just kind of just wing it. But if you can actually use your workshop facilitation skills, for example, and encourage these kinds of conversations, then you can help other people realize, oh, we're working on stuff that's not that useful. So the reason this is valuable is because ideally you want to be somewhere like this. So this is actually the way that I thought about my work, especially when I was on a small team as essentially like the solo designer on this team that was owning this entire goal management product area. And what we would do is we would do a quick win, then we'd do a large project, another quick win, and we would try to make sure that the quick wins were more technically complex so that the engineering team had a lot of time to build, and I could actually go in a corner and work with my PM and engineering lead and just figure out what was coming next. And that really helped us to kind of like create this situation where we had a lot more runway to do more strategic thinking. So this is an example of actually doing that work. So essentially, what happened is my PM and I had a bunch of ideas for potential improvements that were based on customer requests that we were getting in, and we actually plotted out which of them would be more impactful and would take more effort on product and design. And then essentially, this was about a 45-minute FigJam workshop, I think, with my product manager. We had a bunch of different feedback from all over the place. It was like internal dog fooding feedback form, user research from the team itself, all kinds of ideas about what we could be spending our time on. But instead of just jumping into like, oh, we have this list, doing this really helped because then we were actually able to start grouping the work by, oh, this is actually already eng ready, so like we should just have them do all these things. Like we have basically everything we need for those. And then, well, these could be eng ready soon if we maybe spent like about a week on them, or like a couple days. These things would require more effort, but they're really important, and we should do them. And then these are large effort, but you know they're really important. So let's figure out if we can take one or two of these and put them, you know, on the calendar at a time where it makes sense. By sitting down with your PM, for example, or with your engineering lead as well, and kind of scoping these kinds of ideas out, you can actually figure out a way to manage your capacity, which is really important, especially if, as I said, you are like in a situation where you're like one designer on a small or a large, and you have like a large engineering team, for example. Awesome. So the reason that this is also important is because essentially, as you do when you are thinking about your work as a designer as in terms of the pixels, you're also trying to essentially add order to the chaos that is the product development process itself. And essentially, this work can help you to reclaim your agency. Number 4 is to actually show up. So what I mean by this is essentially, you know, you're helping people understand the work that goes into just planning your work and executing your work. You've kind of helped them to empathize with the amount of effort that you spend, you know, on a monthly or quarterly basis. how can you actually also help these other people achieve their goals through the design, not just through like having those conversations that you had earlier, but actually showing up and inserting yourself into conversations where design can help in maybe a non-creepy way. You don't want to like be like, hey, I'm in this data meeting, I don't need to be here. But maybe, maybe it's like, oh, I heard that you were having this challenge, and I think that like running this short workshop could really help. Like, there are ways to do it where I think it feels like organic, essentially. So, for example, if you're missing information and you've noticed that it would be really helpful to actually potentially like organize a very quick, small working session, you can ask for that, or you can ask questions about, if somebody's written up a product specification, for example, and something seems unclear, you can workshop that out, you can ask questions, you can give feedback, and essentially this will help you to actually speak for the customer, who is probably, unfortunately, not in the room, even though they ideally should be. And I think that tone is really important here. So I think it's important to be supportive and, again, to really center the conversation on those goals that you learned earlier, rather than being indignant or punishing people. So one thing that I think about a lot is really how to get people excited about design and invite them in, rather than kind of being like, uh-oh, you didn't involve me again, or like, kind of being the cop. Nobody wants to be design cop. Very much like we don't want to have design systems police. Like, we don't want to have, like, you didn't involve the user again. Like, that's not fun. So if you essentially are being open and coming to the conversation in an open way, then you will avoid making people defensive, which will essentially, if you make people defensive, then they will be incentivized not to include you, and we're trying to avoid that. So other things that you can, for example, do are to facilitate quick alignment. So you can volunteer to illustrate concepts that are really complicated. So this is an example of some data decision-making that was happening, where I actually illustrated just very quickly. I try to just like bring sketching back occasionally, like I know that we have like amazing tools and all that, but I really try to draw sometimes, or like, take out the iPad or whatever and just like do a real quick sketch. But yeah, like just kind of, they were having like a data conversation that was essentially about like, how do we want to like, I think it was like incorporate the concept of time periods into the goal management system. So like quarters, like half years, all that kind of stuff. And we were having a lot of like conversations without actually understanding what the customer experience was going to be like. And this was like in like a technical design document somewhere. And I was like, I can just draw that. Like, I could just help you all make this decision with some illustrations, so that we understand how this technical change we're going to make is actually going to impact the customer experience, which is kind of the point. And it was really helpful. And I do that because I've actually worked on products where we didn't do these kinds of things, and it came back to bite us later in serious ways, where we had to actually make, in some cases, information architecture changes that were really harmful to the customer experience and very confusing. So if you can fix a problem like that with a single drawing, it is totally worth the time. I also love to run workshops to actually encourage people to feel comfortable with the concept of participating in the design process, and to get people excited and to generate ideas. Sometimes I've done design sprints. It's really about looking for the voids and the things that are not known, and figuring out what you might be able to do to actually start to answer some of those questions. Sometimes having an hour-long session can be more effective than going back and forth in a document, for example. So being a designer means that you can help to facilitate these kinds of conversations. And then sometimes people start asking for these things themselves, which is really cool. You can also, as I mentioned, illustrate the future, and that can be, of course, in prototype form, but you can also do cool things like these here. You can do diagrams as well, and you can actually help to kind of map things out so that people understand, like, oh, if I do this, if I make this engineering change, then like what's going to happen to the system itself, and like what are all the different ways that we have to build. So this is really helpful as well, and I'm a huge proponent of leaning into diagrams and any format really that can help people understand the impact that they're going to have. And of course, you can make a vision. So a lot of companies at this point, I think, are super excited about visions. So the one thing I just want to call out is that if you decide to make a vision, it needs to be a product vision, which means it needs to be integrated between design, product, user research, product marketing. Pretty much all the roles need to come together for something like this to be really effective and a useful artifact long term. But it can be something that really aligns people and rallies people and gives them the motivation to build towards something big. So the way that I try to think about visions, for example, is if you're coming up with like a new product area, for example, and you're not sure what direction to go in, a vision can be really helpful. But if you're kind of just like, oh, I kind of know what we're doing already, and I just kind of want to like actually just like sketch things out a little bit. I don't know if a vision is like helpful, or if you're thinking about like one single feature that's like not within the context of the larger product itself, or if you're thinking about your team, but you're not, you have to go talk to other people essentially, and it's a lot of work and effort. So I just always try to warn people, like, don't make a vision for everything. Try to make a vision if there are a lot of questions about something big, new, and scary. And other than that, like, there are probably other ways that you could be spending your time than investing in something like that. All of this is to say there are a lot of different ways that designers can contribute to the direction of the product, the company, your team, and what's important is to really make sure that you are consistently not really begging to be at the table, but essentially just showing up and being present. And through collaborative work together and through conversations, you can show that value rather than having to, for example, tell. And as I said, if there's something that could have been done, you can always, instead of like saying, oh no, we didn't do it that time, you can talk about how in the future you might be able to incorporate more design-forward ways of working into your team's collaboration process. And finally, the last tactic is to incentivize. So this is more specifically aimed at people who are leaders. I think it's really important to make sure that essentially the incentive structure of your company is actually aligned to reward strategic design. So what I mean by that essentially is that it can't be a bottoms-up effort to actually make these kinds of changes. Like, designers individually can go and insert themselves, into teams and so on, but unless the incentives at the higher level are actually aligned to reward people for doing that, you're not going to see long-term consistent change. So I just want to acknowledge that, like, I know I said a lot of things about, you as an individual, but also there need to be changes that are higher up as well. And so what I mean by that is really making sure that, for example, if we want to have strategic design thinking, well, like, we've got craft in our career ladder. How do these things equate? Like, how does design strategy connect to things like craft? Do we need to put strategy also in the design career ladder? And I think just little things like that can really help people to actually prioritize this kind of work, because it is actually like really valuable. So yeah, I think a lot essentially about how to make sure that that's happening. And I had a personal situation where, like, when I was a design manager, I was like asking somebody like, oh, are you interested in mentoring this junior designer? And the person was like, is it in the career ladder? And I was like, no, it's not. And they were like, yeah, I'm not doing it. And that was honestly very smart. Like, I commended that person, and I was like, ooh, we should put this in the career ladder. So same thing applies for things like strategy as well. If you prioritize craft, then people are going to prioritize craft because it's actually going to get them promoted. Awesome. So thinking about this is important not just on the design side, but it also needs to be thought about more broadly. So if we're thinking about designs, goals, and career ladders, are we also changing other functions so that PM, for example, is not being pressured to ship super quickly? Because if they ship quick, then we have to have conversations again about quality, for example. What about engineering? Like, there's so many different intersections of all of our work because we are building products together. So how do we make sure that we really design an organization that wholly can support the kind of outcomes that we want to see? It's a really important question to me. So while individual designers can actually, we can do a lot. We are also essentially, our actions are reflecting the organization's incentives a lot of the time. So when you actually align those, you'll start to see more positive results. If you are an IC, then you can go talk to your manager, and you can really make sure that your goals are aligning with theirs, and that theirs hopefully are aligned with the organization at large. And you can start to have those kinds of conversations about, hey, I noticed, this is not aligning, and I think we should start to have that conversation. Can you maybe go bring that, to your hidden your coven of leaders and maybe make that change? Awesome. So those are all my tips. I know this is a really challenging kind of situation to be in. It's not something that changes immediately. It takes a lot of time. It's essentially like a cultural change. So, you're probably going to be thinking or experiencing like a 3 to 6 month bare minimum kind of when you're trying to work through this, it's going to essentially be a while. But the nice thing is that people are often open to change, and just make sure to be nice to yourself, be nice to other people. And really, just be open, and people will be open to you as well, usually. So to summarize, a lot of people think that design is aesthetics, but by being present and essentially getting involved and showing them how you can contribute, they will be more open and excited to having you involved in their work. And ultimately, we are all working together to build cool products for people, right? Amazing. So if you found this helpful, the last thing I'll say is that I made a series of time management tools. There's a QR code there. I think it should work. But the link is really long. If you want to use these, it'll help you kind of do the thing I was talking about, where you can map out your calendar, and you can actually start to prioritize your work a little bit better and size your work. And so I've made a printable version of that. I also made a Google Sheet version. I made it printable because my partner's a lawyer and we still have a printer. But I know in 2024 a lot of people don't have those. So there's a Google Sheet version in there as well. And then finally, I'm also running a course that's kind of similarly related to, it's a lot about being a staff designer and being strategic, and essentially figuring out how to be a more involved IC leader, an individual contributor who's also stepping into the role of leadership. So if that sounds fun to you, you want to talk about executive communication and essentially kind of cry about the struggles of being a designer in 2024 with other people who've been in the business for a while, that's the jam. That's what we're doing. Awesome. Thank you. That's my website.
Yay. Thank you so much, Kat.
Thank
Fantastic,
you.
Wonderful. Well, so many questions coming in right here as well, and I have my own some, but I, of course, will prioritize the wonderful question from the audience right here. Well, thank you so much, first of all. I think I have to say right away, first, I also have a printer.
Hey!
So this is like a bonding
Printer
moment
gang,
right there.
rise up.
But there is also one person, staff, she says, I'm also obsessed with calendars. Can I please see yours?
Oh man, yeah, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I will happily nerd out and share calendars afterward. Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have a wonderful conversation about calendar design.
Yes, please.
There is also one question from Amy that came quickly. With regards to spending more time and energy on things that actually matter, what is your advice to designers who spend a lot of time doing heavy rework when influential stakeholders just don't like part of a design?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's an interesting conversation to think about the highest paid person in the room's opinion versus the actual customer experience. I have a lot of I usually try to ask questions when somebody comes to me and they say they don't like something. So can you tell me more detail about why you don't like that thing, or why you think this thing should be reworked? Again, I don't just immediately go do the thing that somebody's telling me. I try to explore the problem in a little bit more detail so that I can firstly find potential avenues to have a light debate. Oh, interesting, well, the original reason that we did this was this particular customer insight. Can you kind of tell me more detail about your concern? And then we can start to have more of a dialogue that might result in, well, maybe there is something that I might want to change with a little bit of work. But, maybe we learned stuff along the way where we were designing it originally, and that person doesn't quite understand. So I kind of want to understand, where they're at, and then from there we can find an agreement. And then the last thing I'll say is also that I think it's important to, again, like use those as moments to prioritize. So, oh, okay, well, like if this is the particular issue that you have with this design, well, we could spend this amount of time working on that. We were originally going to prioritize this particular piece of work. Do you have a preference in terms of which of these things that we work on next? That's something that you can absolutely do, and I think people are very generally open to that conversation.
Alien is wondering, thank you so much, Kat. How would you communicate the value of design if organizations are constantly bringing in consultants because cheap
Classic.
and doesn't retain in-house?
Yeah.
What measurements are in place? Apart from goals, what else is there?
Yeah, I think something that might be worth considering in a case like that is the long-term impact of the hiring these consultants. So, for example, I've seen, like, for example, the government does a lot of subcontracting, and there's a lot of maintenance challenges with that work where, like, you'll have these new people come in and maintaining, like, they have to relearn everything. So, like, there might be, like, a cost of, like, the constant re-onboarding essentially that you have to do, and that could be part of the conversation about like, oh, well, like this is not a valuable use of our time and energy. I'm trying to think. It definitely depends on like what the business values most. So if they're thinking about like cost effectiveness, then you can use that language of actually this is really expensive for these particular reasons. But that might be kind of a hard thing to fight, to be frank, because it kind of depends on like who is benefiting from that.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about, because what we've been noticing as well is that we, one of the things that becomes really important is to really understand what are we doing here as a company, as a product team, and whatever. Because in the end, there are certain kind of tasks that we want to perform and we want to excel at. So we better measure how well we're doing that in terms of completion times, success rates, and stuff like that. And once you start talking about those kind of numbers, we're going to measure UX, right? Then all of a sudden you have a very different conversation.
Yeah.
Right? There is a very cautious question from Paul.
Ooh.
Very cautious, very careful. What's the best approach for a friendly developer who desperately needs an immediate designer's input?
Ooh, interesting. I guess it kind of depends on, like, if we're talking, like what stage we're at in a project. So if it's like, oh, you know, I did this work, like, can you look at it, like. That is a challenge for sure. Like designers are kind of like on fire a lot of the time, to be frank. I wonder if maybe there's more of a broad conversation about like, hey, how do you like to work? Like how do you want me to request feedback from you? Like maybe by setting expectations like at the beginning of a project, or if you're in the middle of a project, you know, you can kind of check in. Maybe that's the way that could work. So for example, could you start to put together several requests for feedback into like one block of time where you actually sit down and go through them together? That could be something that you could ask about in terms of making it into a process so that it's not as random and there's a little bit more expectation in place for that kind of involvement. But I think if it's a surprise for a designer, again, then it becomes context switching, and that's the hardest part, I think.
Totally. And then the final question here, I think that we're running a bit behind schedule, from Taylor, very personal question as well. How has your game design work impacted how you think about UX in other spaces?
Oh yeah. It's so fun to be a game designer because I think what it's done for me is it's made me think a lot about sound, and there's this general concept of like game feel or like juice, like just like things that make the experience feel really engaging. And obviously you don't want to like be delightful like all the time. Like I try to think more about I'm trying to read the room and like really understand, you know, what should people be feeling at this particular time? I think that's the kind of stuff that game design has really taught me. So I always encourage people, bare minimum, try some games, especially like Nintendo makes a lot of great games that are very like juicy, and yeah, obviously there are a lot of like really great indie games. There's a game called Venba that is really, really good. It's VENBA, and that game in particular I feel like just does a really good job of like setting the mood. And so indie games and then like certain polished larger games are great references. for the design work that we do, especially if you're thinking about like mobile, for example. I think mobile apps in particular and like desktop apps are a really good space. And I feel like Arc is a good, like the browser did such a good job with like sound when you open it the first time. Like that is an example of taking game design and like integrating it into a user experience.
Fantastic. Well, I can only from my end just recommend to go ahead and explore Kat's blog. There are lots of really great articles and stuff around everything. I mean, this is just wonderful. And thank you so much, Kat, for pushing it and publishing it.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for reading.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Kat.
Yay.
Thank you.